It's the Real News Network. I'm Shamini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. On Monday in Turkey, the editor-in-chief and senior staff of Cumhuriyet, a newspaper, were arrested on charges of terrorism in the latest crackdown since the failed coup in July of this year. Cumhuriyet is one of the last newspapers left which is critical of President Erdogan. The Turkish paper Hurriyet Daily News quoted the state-run news agency as saying these journalists at the paper are suspected of attempting to precipitate a coup through subliminal messages in their columns, and the senior staff from this newspaper have been charged with committing crimes on behalf of the Fethullah terrorist organization and the PKK. These arrests follow the shutdown of 15 other media outlets last Sunday, including one of the world's only women's news agencies. Joining us now to discuss the situation about Turkey is Baris Karaagac. Baris is lecturer in international development studies at Trent University in Ontario. He's also the editor of the book Accumulations, Crises and Struggles, Capital and Labor in Contemporary Capitalism. Thanks so much for joining us, Baris.
Hello, Sharmini. Thanks for having me.
So, Baris, the German chancellor weighed in on the shutdown and the crackdown on these newspapers and journalists. Let's look at what she had to say.
Dass das hohe Gut der Presse- und Meinungsfreiheit immer wieder aufs Neue eingeschränkt
As
wird.
to Turkey, it is extremely alarming to me and the federal government that the freedom of the press is being curtailed time and again. The latest example of these already very unfortunate developments is what is happening to the editors and journalists of the newspaper Cumhuriyet. We have serious doubts that this is allowed under the principles of a constitutional state. As we did with Mr. Dündar, we will follow the trials of all the arrested journalists very closely. The journalists can be sure of our solidarity, as can those in Turkey who are fighting for freedom of the press and freedom of opinion under a very difficult circumstance. The German ambassador yesterday visited the editorial department of Cumhuriyet to underline our support and to show how vitally we see the freedom of the press and freedom of opinion. We will continue to use our contacts on all levels to make this clear, and of course the subject will play a central role in the negotiations for EU entry. The situation is alarming.
The Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yildirim was quite dismissive of criticism that Turkey has gotten from Chancellor Merkel as well as other EU representatives. He was rather direct in his response. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
Efendim, bu gazeteyle ilgili gözaltılar bizim kırmızı çizgimiz.
Today, somebody from the European Parliament says the detention of journalists from that newspaper is a red line. Brother, we don't care about your red line. It's the people who draw the red line. What importance does your line have? Turkey is not a country you can bring into line with threats. Turkey is empowered by its people, and it gives account only to its people.
Türkiye gücünü milletten alır, hesabını da millete verir.
So, Baris, EU is holding entry to the EU over Erdogan's head. But if you take seriously what the Prime Minister is saying here, it looks like it doesn't really matter what the EU or Angela Merkel thinks or has to say.
Well, becoming part of the European integration project has been one of the pillars of Turkish foreign policy since the early 1960s, when Turkey applied for accession. But recently, that goal doesn't seem to be one of the new regime's priorities. The regime's priority at this moment is to consolidate its power after a coup attempt that took place on July 15. So, some of it might be posturing. It's not easy for Turkey to cut off its ties with Europe, and I'm sure the government is listening to what people like Merkel have to say, but EU membership has not been one of the government's priorities recently.
So, Baris, give us a sense of what these latest crackdowns on the media is about, and certainly give us also a sense of that this is not the first time that Erdogan and his government has tried to shut down various media sources that are critical of him.
Well, this is another attempt by Erdogan and the government to silence social and political opposition in Turkey. Since the failed coup attempt that took place again on the 15th of July, the two targets have been media outlets and also bureaucrats, businessmen, etc., who have ties to the Gulen movement, the cleric which is led by the cleric who lives in Pennsylvania, and the Kurdish movement. In this last stage, what we see is that the state has closed down many media outlets that are related, that have links with the Kurdish movement. So, and Cumhuriyet, which is known as the leading, which is the leading secular Kemalist newspaper in Turkey. So what we are seeing in Turkey is a gradual but decisive change in the regime. The Kemalist regime that was established in the early 1920s. So we are witnessing a regime change as well as a transformation in the political and military elites in Turkey, which are replaced by new ones.
Baris, many things have been changing in Turkey since the attempted coup. Give us a sense of what we know about that coup and what shifts have taken place geopolitically and nationally as a result of that coup attempt.
Well, we still do not have a clear picture as to who was behind the coup and what exactly happened on that day. There's a time period of 5 to 6 hours about which we have no idea or very little information as to what happened in that time period. But recently, there have been a lot of columns and some ex-military people writing on the issue. And these people have been arguing that actually in that time period, there were negotiations between Erdogan and a faction within the military that has been referred to as the Eurasianists. That the Erdogan, according to the official discourse, the people who were behind this coup attempt were Gulanists, supporters of Gulen. But we know that the real picture is a little bit more complex, and more than one group must have participated in a coup attempt. So in order to secure the failure of this coup attempt, Erdogan negotiated with one group within the military, and that was the nationalists in the military. And only after securing their support, it was possible to prevent the coup from happening. Who are these people? And the interesting thing is that right after this coup attempt, some of these Eurasianist officers who had been persecuted before were promoted. So these people are quite critical of Turkey's alliance with the United States and NATO. They want Turkey to adopt a more independent, autonomous foreign policy, or foreign policies that is aligned with that of Russia, China, and Iran. Some of these people are playing a key role in Turkish military today. But at the same time, they are staunch secularists. Therefore, that's a shaky coalition or alliance between Erdogan and these people right now. And that conflict or that tension that will be centered on the issue of secularism might lead to important consequences in the future.
So, Baris, what implications is this having on the local situation? We know that since the coup attempt, the country has been in a state of emergency. This has allowed Erdogan to get rid of many, many thousands of people from the civil service. In fact, the latest sacking numbers are 10,000. And approximately this, I think the total number now sacked is about 110,000. So people who have been sacked and suspended and so on must be rising up, not to mention the number of people that have been arrested and formally detained in some sort of way. I don't know what's happening to them. What is your assessment of what's happening nationally at this time?
Well, of course, there is some opposition, particularly from the left and the Kurdish movement. But the significant portion of the Turkish society is either intimidated by the new regime or is giving its support to this new regime. Erdogan has done something very interesting and maybe quite smart recently, that he was able to rally the nationalist voters or support behind him. Now, what we see in the parliament is an unofficial, an informal coalition between the AKP, the ruling party, which has about 50% support in Turkish society, and the MHP, an ultra-nationalist, or if you will, neo-fascist party. The thing that has brought them together is chauvinistic nationalism. So the new regime is being constituted on a platform, the pillars of which are conservative Islam and chauvinistic nationalism. And this is a very, very dangerous mix in a country like Turkey, particularly given that country's or that region's history. We see this new nationalistic rhetoric also in Turkish approach to Syria and Iraq. Recently, both Prime Minister Yildirim and the President Erdogan have referred to a document that was prepared in 1920 called the National Pact, where in a debate on Mosul. Turkey wants to be a part of the forces that are organizing the offensive on Mosul to liberate it from ISIS, but there has been a significant resistance both from the Iraqi government and the United States. So Erdogan and Yildirim have argued that Mosul historically belongs to Turkey, referring to that document that I just mentioned called the National Pact. Erdogan has also criticized the Lausanne Treaty of 1923, which in a way constituted the new Turkish Republic and determined its borders. He said the Lausanne Treaty, and he referred to, he actually implied that the people who signed, the Turks, the Kemalists who signed this treaty were traitors, because he thinks that Turkey ended up with less territory than it should have. And he has claimed that the Greek islands should also belong to Turkey. Of course, this created some alarm among Greek officials on the other side of the Aegean Sea. So that rhetoric, that discourse, which is reflective of the new chauvinistic and religious ideology, is quite concerning.
And there's further complications now, of course, because of Gulen, U.S. harboring Gulen in the U.S., Turkey and and Erdogan in particular has turned away from its alliance with the U.S., but there's a complication here. Turkey is also a member of NATO. Of course, membership at NATO is also important to Turkey. So where is that at with its turn towards Russia just recently after the coup?
Well, even if there's this alliance or coalition between the Eurasianist officers and Erdogan, it is difficult for Turkey to leave the Western alliance in the near future. We don't know what's going to happen. It depends on a number of factors. It depends on, first of all, whether or not that shaky alliance between Erdogan and the Eurasianist officers will survive in the near future or in the medium term. But what we can say with a certainty is that there is a significant tension between the US administration and Turkey with regard to what role Turkey should be playing both in Syria and in northern Iraq. Turkey has a very assertive attitude, and Turkish officials have been has been saying that Turkey needs to play an active role in clearing or cleansing the border of terrorist groups. But these terrorist groups include both ISIS and Kurds, the PYD and its armed forces. But Americans have been resistant, as well as, of course, both the Kurds and the Iraqi government. Actually, a couple of days ago, Turkey again restated its desire to participate in the Mosul offensive. And it's actually, a couple of days ago, it sent its tanks to the border, to the Iraqi border. But then the Iraqi prime minister responded by saying that if Turkey enters Iraqi territory, it will be a declaration of war. So Turkey is playing with fire in the region. That's a very dangerous process for both Syria and Iraq, but also for Turkey. Turkey's further involvement in both of these countries will have some domestic consequences.
And this is because of Turkey's interest in Mosul and historical.
Yes.
They feel they have historical rights to Mosul.
According to Erdogan and Prime Minister Yildirim, as well as the media that is close to the new regime, Mosul is and should be part of Turkey. So recently we've seen all these new maps with irredentist claims, with Mosul part of greater Turkey. This is a very dangerous process, very, very dangerous process, and people should be concerned about that.
All right, Baris, I thank you so much for joining us. You've clarified a lot of very important issues. Looking forward to having you back very soon, because I think the situation in Turkey is intensifying, and we at The Real News have not stayed on top of it. So we're looking forward to having you back next week.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Real News Network.